Welcome to PhillyCAM's March Live Culture program. FringeArts and PhillyCAM are partnering to bring you an evening of poetry and conversation about media justice and news literacy. FringeArts is presenting Legal Tender by Anti-Gravity Performance Project, April 16th through 18th. Legal Tender is an episodic duet of movement and poetry, considering the relationship between information, consumer culture, labor, and borders. Tonight, you're going to be hearing a conversation between three incredible activists and advocates, as well as some poetry performed by Legal Tender's lead artist, Dacuyan, informed by his year of work with PEN America, teaching news literacy and storytelling around the country. Kyle will then facilitate a conversation with Mariam Dembele of the Movement Alliance Project and Sherry Culver of the Center for Media and Information Literacy. Thanks for joining us and enjoy.
We create spaces in our brains of static conviction. I'm in Daytona at a crab shack, watching the tilt-a-whirl from my dinner table, waiting for the thunderstorm I know inevitably will happen. Earlier today, I sat in a circle at the library with 80 bikers and church ladies and ACLU hippies, talking about people's perceptions of the news. This is my work. I go into communities and talk about the media people read and watch and trust or don't. A Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who had retired to the Everglades asked the room, "Do you really believe there is enough actual information to fill 24 hours a day of continuous television?" I understand the point, and yet, yes, I do believe information is a volume that will exceed time for forever. Up the coast of this peninsula, children are shouting from the tops of cars at the adults who have failed once more to keep them alive. After the meeting, a woman wept to me in the vestibule that the members of her knitting group live in a world entirely devoid of news. I don't know what to tell her. But the truth will touch us all eventually, I trust. Like the wind from the back and forth of waiters making "breathe now" these napkins on the table. Like the patrons who sense in their gathering at the windows that rain is in the forecast and roiling at the end of Main Street, which in Daytona is the ocean. What do you read? What do you watch? Who do you listen to? Who do you like? On television, on the radio, on Twitter. What do you like to do? What really drives you crazy? When you open what's the first thing that you open? What do you think is the difference between news, fake news, opinion, commentary, advertisement, propaganda, information, fact, inquiry, gotcha, questions, condescension, misrepresentation, bias? Who has your back? Who gets it? Who do you believe in? Who's good enough? What do you think is wrong with? What are you afraid of? What about your kids? What about your parents? Your neighbors? Your friends? What do you think? What do you think about what they think? What about this morning? What have you been hearing? What have you been sharing? Why did you share it? How did it make you feel? How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? I keep a running list of questions for media conversations. How does it make you feel? Is the question I ask people to ask one another. Usually we're in a room of deliberately different strangers. We start in a place where the processing can happen quickly, as factually and rote as possible, and then we make our way to where language gets to be its slowest. It can take more than a minute for many of us to articulate what we feel. We have different relationships to speech, and speech changes in the presence of another person. There are merits to beginning in those apparently more neutral territories of memory, but it's important to remember that what we remember and how is subject to how we feel, and how we feel is shaped by any number of conditions, narratives, patterns that we might be differently rewarded by, castigated by, alienated by over time. I got into media work after the 2016 election because it was becoming increasingly clear to me that we were approaching, or maybe far past, the point of truth collapsing. I realized that I had been operating in a sphere of perceived reality that was totally oppositionally different from a victorious and, to my mind, deeply violent electorate. And in particular, that the webs of media I perceived as fringe were actually absorbed in a fully functional, prevalent, deeply resourced apparatus, that my own diet of news and zeitgeist was itself an apparatus of largely my invention. I was traveling about once a week to communities around the US and learning about the scale and nature of the different threats facing our free press, the threats that local news outlets were experiencing materially, the evaporation especially of local investigative reporting, the carpet-bagging, corporatized consolidation of local papers and television channels into news that was at best flattened, recycled air, at worst steamrolled into something dangerously replicate and ideological. The shopping spree for television, the conglomerates like Sinclair pressed ahead on the more than right-ish talking points, teleprompted word for word, not to mention the historically high and continuously escalating distrust reported toward the media. The questions of who, capital T, the media, constitutes. The desertification of information, neighborhoods and enclaves without internet access, without any print media distribution, the rural constellation where this is even more vastly the case. The architectures of alternative facts that have legitimately entrenched themselves in civic life, the legitimate anger people feel over the ways media has failed them, the extent to which provably false content has eclipsed the truth in volume, truly. And in talking about these and other issues with people and focusing on how they respond and situate themselves emotionally with regard to news, what became very clear to me is that the market forces surrounding journalism, the conditions of competition inherent in our fourth estate, have coagulated with our particular political situation into a litigation of meaning. We are grappling for the arbitration of what exchange is. Coercion and collusion, decency, a misdemeanor, locker room talk, assault. We are witnessing rapid etymological shifts relative to the conditions of constant televised occurrence we live in, which is both deeply alarming and interesting to me as a poet. Because I feel, on the one hand, that language has no integrity, that it is a deliberately anti-absolute material, and at the same time, that language has a vulnerable and radioactive relationship to reality. I started tonight with a poem I wrote around the time of the Parkland shooting in Florida, which you'll recall was reported with attendant conspiracy theorizing of crisis actors. That was language I had never heard before, crisis actor. And I resent its introduction into our idiom. I'm going to share another poem I wrote that's also in this performance piece, Legal Tender, that came out of the adjacent reporting around family separation, detention of migrant children, and the Kavanaugh hearings, and other incidents of school gun violence, which really became persistently recurring news throughout my year of media work. And this poem is called Compassion. Compassion. Compassion is to suffer with, not care. In fact, it's inverse. Requires a leveling, a plural subject. Prioritize every day a new undoing, even if a movement no one will see. The different logic possible if we changed the people occupying power over language, the professions, teachers, doctors, bosses, judges, the lobbies who control the means that reproduce the argument. What illness is, and order, the men who make the case, the interpreters. I will never call him justice, who govern definition, the premise, the sculpture of a system from a document, its addenda and erosions, in whose frame the right to bear the violent, all of it. The arms we bear, we hoard for what? The symbol of protection. We must protect. Who governs must, the from, the conditions which trigger, whose shadow arouses, who profits from our terror, whose right, the definite article of which universal, right, what is by who ordained, and when and under what, the provenance is what. What if in an act of self-defense? What if in the course of self-preservation, the self-vulnerable to who? They, them, those people over there approaching. What if a child? What if my child? I would do anything. At the root of fear is if. The object, the any. Who construes the two? Who fashions their horizons? Of nearly 200 constitutions in the world today, only 3 include the right to bear arms: Mexico, Guatemala, and the United States of America. Ours, the only of the 3 with boundless provision. Mexico, Guatemala, the United States of America. Makes you think the girl, she was 7 traveling from Guatemala. Travel implies choice. Revise. 7, she was fleeing north toward asylum. Days without water, without rest, held by the Border Patrol, in whose arms? 7, she was seeking refuge. 7, and we killed this child. We killed her. Use the proper subject, verb, and object. Jacqueline Call McKean. A name is not a symbol. To say, to form, to hold the cavern of the missing, to account for arms, the border, the men keeping watch of what we call security. The plural self we act in makes you think the tears, what becomes impossible in a state of dehydration. The gas they use upon the migrants, we send to the capital the architects of force. We see the Warhol and Wojnarowicz at the Whitney, where the art is underwritten by the men who make the gas. The men who own the companies that make the gas, the poison, the suits the soldiers and enforcers wear to terrorize the people, the prisons, our culture. A taste for blame more powerful than our will to divest. Well, if they, exoneration of the self, well, I am not, well, I don't, I would never. And we share our stupid pictures to show we saw the show. We are a cultured people. We march, we read, we brunch. Look, you see the wind that issues from the barrel of a gun in the desert, every desert. A mother in the sun with her lungs full of sand. Leave it, the man says of the body. The wind will bury all of us. In January in Kentucky, in a town away from the country's largest rifle manufacturer, a child brought his father's make to school and opened fire. And among the first reporters to arrive upon the scene was his mother. It is whose responsibility to tell? To make sense if we go back, as is our way with if. To seek the fork of not and what. I stood some months later among the men who make from the assembly lines of guns a livelihood. Sir, the man said to the governor, sir, I am a card-carrying member of. I make a living doing. But this must stop. Shh, the governor. Shh, the man. The microphone, who has it? And whose voice must stand without? I stood some months later before one of the oldest living things in North America, an oak tree in a Carolina. The tree precedes the colonies, the people milling in its shade, naive of difference, time like a blood or root happening at once in all directions, other time inside of this time, the tree photosynthesizing light, its history, confluence, will, charity, taking all of the invisible, the elements fashioning a self. The body dissolves into minerals that feed the worms, which till the soil, which nourishes and keeps the tree in place. The tree detoxifies the air, into which we have released our bullets and our waste. The byproducts of what we imagined to be necessity. We need one another. Capillary action of the abject heavenward. When a child dies, in her memory, we plant sometimes a tree. So I'm interested in the articulations of the natural world as an antidote to endlessly constructed digital terrain. There are 40,000 search entries happening every second on Google alone. Last year there were 2 trillion searches, which is 155 times the number of people in the world. Though, of course, our searching proclivities increase exponentially the more and more addicted we become to the immediate gratifications of curiosity. And it occurs to me that the accumulation of permanently recorded search items, little tokens of our consciousness, vastly outnumber the objects living and inanimate which populate our earth. I think about the data that survives extinction and the feedback loops our curiosity creates to produce media that reinforces feeling and conviction. The ways we are cellularized of our own devices. I'm going to share one more poem, and then we'll get out of poems and into talking. This is a poem about a part of us called posture. Posture is something all of us have at different times and to different degrees, though usually unconsciously so, and who determines the extent? Not me. Most of my life I've had what many people call bad posture. Can you see? I can feel, but only sometimes. For example, when I curve my shoulders at a party to put my hands in my pockets. I've tried the exercise ball and hated the constant wobbling. It made me seasick in a way that comes from my butt, which, no. I've not tried the device that looks like a nicotine patch and connects to my iPhone because I'm suspicious of anything that detects or transmits my data. Also, frankly, money. This seems a very stupid thing to buy, and you pay for its service on a billing basis so that you can receive an ongoing graph of your miserable posture. Already, I have an excess of things I pay for monthly whose benefits I do not really perceive. For example, debt. I live with debt in probably the same way I live with posture, which is poorly, though successfully, in the sense that I'm pretty good at just not thinking about either. I have over $100,000 in debt. But some of you have a lot of money and bad posture. When she was running for governor of Georgia, Stacey Abrams admitted her debt is over $200,000. I think more people who hold elected office should have debt, and then they would understand that governing is different from ruling. The debt of Japan is more than $10 trillion. Yesterday, an economist described Japan's debt to me as highly reliable, meaning reliably paid. Most debt, like Japan's, comes from war because war is the most expensive thing we do. Where else does it come from, debt? I mean posture. Posture, like posterity, etymologically from place, position, status. In Japanese, posture's closest word is shisei, made of 2 kanji, where the symbol that means symbol meets the symbol for state force. Is the spine a place we learn behavior? Does it come from parents or from a kind of practiced smallness? Or work, the physical performance and demands of work? This question of will I ever have a positive net worth doesn't really mean anything to me because you can't take money with you when you die, so what's the point of keeping it or really even having it? We are all approaching zero. Money does not exist without debt. The premise of value requires a system of owing and having, which, once you disregard, can free you too from caring. I do care about the threat incurred upon humanness by money, and this brings me back to my misgivings about the little posture pad. Does anyone else have this marketed to them? I care about my data, which embarrasses me to say, as though I were a person who believes in chemtrails, but I care and am alarmed by the state and market study of my consciousness, that there exists a path of curiosity, of search terms, of lurking, of scrolling images, of overheard speech, which identifies me, a permanent and accumulating record of the objects and people I have obsessively regarded, of lies I have told, of things I have done to hurt others accidentally and deliberately, of ugly things that I have wanted or believed and do no longer or still, of time that I have wasted on schlock, on vanity, on pornography, on jealousy, on malice, on revenge, everything and nothing, everything and nothing, everything and nothing I have given away. This is a poem about a part of us called posture, the part that absorbs all others, which we are giving away our posture. We are giving away these parts of us, our archives, the cord we bear that bears us, the part of us that holds what we forget, even joy, even pleasure. Nothing joins the body without the mind forgetting. When I die, I hope that I am really dead, no trace of me, with nothing to my name. And now we're going to get into talking. I'm so excited to be joined by Sherry and Mariam. So welcome. We're all in space together now. Yes.
Yes, I think so.
So I'm so super excited to be talking with you about media literacy and media justice because I spend so much time thinking about this as an artist, and I love having the opportunity to talk about this with people who are practicing in education and movement building work. I think a lot of people who don't spend all of their time in media literacy or media justice don't always have a full understanding of what that encompasses. So I'm hoping that will come out in our conversation a little bit. But I thought that one place we could maybe begin is just how did we respectively come to media, and then specifically media advocacy and media literacy? So.
Yeah, I guess I can start. So I started in the media creation world. I studied journalism, and I was super attracted to that because it just seemed like a field of learning. Like with journalism, you're constantly talking to people, interviewing them, researching, like all of that. And I love that state of just knowledge gathering. But from that and creating this media and producing it into the world, you start thinking of who has access to that. Who's able to produce it as well, who else has a platform, and these questions of media justice started to pop up in there. So I ended up, the organization I'm currently with really combines those two things, so that production of media and then also like looking at how we make this accessible and how we make it something that really lives with every person, regardless of gender, age, socioeconomic status, and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's funny, I think about there are pieces that make sense, and then there are pieces that I feel are like, and then magic happened there, and I don't really know why that happened. I at a very young age, when I had a chance to see live theater, I felt, when I was pretty young, I'm probably 10, 11, 12 years old, that there was a real transformative power to theater. It made me feel things that I couldn't feel any other way. And I thought, everybody needs to see that, not just 100 or 200 or 300 people in the theater. So I clearly need to go into television because everybody will get to see theater on television. And then that led me to public television. And that led me to thinking more about quality television. What makes quality television? Which made me just sort of reflect on it. Then in the midst of that, I was working at a public TV station, and someone said to me, you should volunteer for a program we're starting at this board that I serve on that's called Creating Critical Viewers. And I was like, I so should be part of that. Still nobody used the word. And then I went to one of the first meetings, and somebody used the word media literacy and explained it, and I was like, that's it. That's what I really care about. And so I feel like it just sort of pieced together. And I haven't spent, I don't spend all of my work life in media literacy directly, but to me, like all roads lead to media literacy, truly.
I love that you brought up the theater, because I also think of the theater as a kind of uniquely democratic space. like a space where we experience a particular kind of democracy. And I think about the relationship between media and, as you were saying, Mariam, access and empowerment. And I would love to talk a little more about how you and your respective work are thinking about specifically issues of access and empowerment around media.
Yeah. For us, I think a lot of it involves, a lot of it started with listening to people and seeing what they needed from their media, sharing what they were telling us, and then amplifying those voices. And then from there, we moved into a space where it was passing the mic. So that gives some sort of like platform to folks who want to tell their stories, who don't have traditionally have that access to media through mainstream media. That kind of encompasses the platform part, but then there also is the work we do around policy work. So looking at internet access in terms of who can pay for it, who can afford it, talking to people like Comcast and knocking on their doors, and really trying to push them to give discounts, give free internet to people who are low income. You know, they live in our city, they live in Philadelphia. So really making that accessible to folks. Looking at things like net neutrality, we did a huge campaign where we were really pushing for it to be saved. We don't know how that's going to go yet. We just got the note from national, but now it's in the states, so we're fighting on the state level to save net neutrality. But that's a space where the internet is a space which is everybody has access at this point. If you have the resources to afford internet, you have the space to really like go on any website, produce what you want to produce. And so we find that space really liberating, and we don't want to see it really used by corporations and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where our main battle is now. Yeah.
Information access is so important. Yeah,
it's funny. I think about when I first started doing media literacy work decades ago, a lot of the conversation was about understanding who controlled it, who owned it, commercials, being able to interpret commercials, things. And I remember the first time I heard somebody speak about media literacy as a basic democratic right. And I was like, I had just never thought of it that way. And that's really how, I think as the years have gone by, that's really the direction of it, that you can't be a full citizen in the US without access to the internet. You need that to get a driver's license, to vote, to get knowledge about medical issues and any number of things. And so that piece of the access piece is huge. But I also, I don't think that people have access. And they don't know what they're doing. And they don't, that when I talk to folks about media literacy, one of the pieces of the definition is about creating media. So not just about analyzing it, but creating it. So it's not enough for you to be able to just, at any age, for you to be able to think, oh, I know they're manipulating me. There's also another piece, which is, do you know how to upload a video to YouTube? Do you know how to share a photograph with people that you know? Those are skills that everybody really needs to have now. They're not just skills for young people.
Right.
Everyone needs those skills.
Right. We're participating in media production and consumption as makers and watchers in such a different way now. And so I'm curious how do you think that bears upon this relationship between media and empowered participation in civic life?
They're totally connected, right? Yeah, it is. I think that's one of the difficulties I find in trying to convince the powers that be, elected officials, high-level education influencers, about the need for media literacy, is they're seeing media literacy as a very boxed definition around analyzing media, when really it's all these other things we're talking about in terms of being an active civic participant in civic life. It's so much more than that, and I don't think lots of folks really, people have not fully embraced that situation.
Do you think there are other components of media literacy that make it an essential democratic right? I mean, there's the piece of just information access. We need information in order to make empowered civic decisions in our interest, right? And there are issues of information access, of people not able to get to the internet or to get to print media. Then there's, as you're saying, just understanding how media is made and being able to approach it with a dimension of criticality. And then there's also this piece of like, how can we make it? How can we be active agents in here? Do you think there are other pieces that we haven't touched on yet?
I mean, I think being able to express yourself,
yes,
is a pretty basic need,
yeah,
right? So it's whether I'm sitting face to face with you and I'm articulating it through speech or sign language or whatever way I'm able to do that, I need a way to do that. I have things in my mind, in my body, I want to share with someone else. We are social beings. That's the way we share now. We don't only share face to face, we share digitally. To be a person who communicates with others in the world, you need to be able to share digitally too. And that's where the danger comes in also.
That's what I was about to ask. Yeah, what's the flip side here? There's the need to express and everything wonderful and important that comes with being able to express and having that platform, but what are some of the counter risks that are coming out of this new environment?
Yeah.
That's where you get involved in the activism work in terms of where the dangers come in too.
Okay, I'm thinking of the amount of misinformation that sometimes gets spread online and hate that will get spread online. And I think that's really where like the understanding and ability to critically analyze media is super important. So we've learned a bunch of different strategies. We've taught people different strategies, but I think the key part of it is really whenever you look at a piece of media, whether it's a book, an article, whether it's a tweet, a meme, is really looking at the who and the why. So who created that and what was their perspective and why did they create it? What was their motivation behind it? So those are two of the tools that I like to give folks when they're engaging in it. But beyond just, there is this like really important piece of giving people the tools to understand media literacy and critically engage. But then there's also this other piece of, now we have this platform that's the internet. Now we have all these different social medias. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have Instagram. But what responsibility do they have as well in making sure that the information they're sharing, especially within ads, within articles, is honest and truthful? And on our side, at Media Mobilizing Project, we do a little bit of that too, where we're looking at these platforms and saying, like Facebook recently, in 2016, there was that huge problem where they had a lot of election misinformation going on their website. They had a lot of ads that were fake, a ton of that stuff. Now it's 2020, and Facebook released a statement saying that they're not going to fact check political ads.
Yeah,
that was amazing.
Really awful.
That was really amazing.
Yeah, so it's really like, pushing these So in addition to like giving, we're all still in a state of learning media literacy, especially in the age of internet. It's while we learn that, how can these platforms support us in that, and what is their responsibility to do so?
I think it's really important that when people, hear the story about Facebook wanting to, when Zuckerberg makes a statement, I'm going to stand back and let Facebook make the decision. What he's really saying, and he just doesn't, of course, say it directly, is the government needs to make the regulation. He doesn't want to be the one. He doesn't want Facebook to be the one to do it, because then if you're a customer and you're angry, you'll leave Facebook. But if the government makes that decision and Facebook just has to abide by it, sorry, government made the decision, then he doesn't lose customers. So in my classes a lot of times I say, when you don't know the answer to something in this class, the answer is money. And that's, these are businesses, and they have to loop back. I thought one of your early lines in your poems was, do we really have enough information to fill 24/7? And you said yes, right? So, but the danger part is, what are we filling it with?
Right.
So certainly there is plenty of information, gazillions to fill 24/7. But why are we filling it with the same 5 things over and over and over again? Yeah, because there's not enough money to hire multiple people to have them go around. It takes money to fill it in rich and diverse and complicated ways. It's much easier to show the same thing 10 times.
And pure information is not by itself profit driving. So the world of news that we experience includes information, but it also includes opinion and commentary and all of these other things that are kind of adjacent but not the same.
Right. Well, you think about how, I mean, things have just moved so fast in changing. I don't think I mean, certainly the newspapers knew that their business model relied quite a bit on classified advertising. And then when that went away, when Craigslist and other things came on and changed the way they were making money, that just was like that magic trick where you pull the sheet out. I mean, it just happened so fast that nobody had a chance to figure it out. And then, sort of, we need you to pay for it somehow. How are we going to? I mean, and I often feel like we're in the middle. It's like we threw it all up, and it's still in the air, or maybe it landed. We're like, nope, this isn't working. Throw it up again. Like, we're still trying to figure that out. And yet, in the middle of trying to figure it all out, we have elections, we have schools that have to be run, we have kids that have to be taught. I mean, their life is going on and information is going on while Facebook's trying to figure out what to allow, and Twitter's trying to figure out what to allow, and we're trying to figure out who to vote for, and it's scary.
Right. I want to talk about a consequence of that shifting media environment and sort of both business and government not wanting to take accountability. There is an issue of misinformation, but there's also kind of a related sort of gradation version of that's bias or content that perpetuates bias and is inflected with damaging stereotypes or just casting certain news issues in a particular way. And I especially want to hear about that relative to the movement work that you're doing, Marianne.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that really comes with the media literacy aspect and the who and the why. So who wrote this post, that's really like one way. Why did they write it one way? And I do think there's value to having opinion. There's a lot of value there, and there's value to having, if you want to call it like bias, whatever, if you have understanding of the topic. Like we work with individuals and community members who are experts in their experiences in a way that cannot be understated, in a way that cannot be undervalued. They understand that issue maybe way more than a reporter who comes in for 10 minutes, to get an interview. And so they have like a nuanced this topic and can speak about it and give a really, really great perspective on it. And it might have a leaning in it and a tilt, but maybe that's for a reason. I think the problem is when you start getting these biased perspectives from people who aren't touching the issues and who may come with ideas of hate. They might not understand it. They might, like have different perspectives based on their life experiences. And I think that's really when when you're a consumer and you're looking at those posts and looking at those ideas, that's when you need to be really critical and look at, is this person accurate? Like there's this other strategy of media literacy that actually PhillyCAM shared, which is called PIES. So the P stands for point of view, the I stands for interest, the E is experience, and the S is sources. So that's like a strategy that we tell folks to use when they're looking at media. And I think the sources part is really interesting and really important. When you're looking at that post, what are their sources? Where are they getting their ideas from? Is it something credible? Is it something that you can rely on? Or is it just from, nowhere, from outer space and from these ideas of hate?
And I mean, media literacy globally has used 5 key questions for a long time. And one of those 5 key questions is, how might different people view this differently? What is missing from this? So being able to look at something, and actually I'll give an example. So I really enjoy watching Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. And I think he's very funny, and I learn things when I watch John Oliver. But from a media literacy perspective, very often the examples that he gives when those little boxes come up beside him, so we are in 2020, those boxes are very often 2013, 2012, 2010. And a person, that doesn't take away from the point he's trying to make, but it does make me wonder if that point is as valid as you're saying. That's the most recent example you can really find to give. Why are you choosing that and not something that actually came out last year? So now that doesn't take away from the point, but it's getting in the practice of asking those questions. Why would he be doing that? maybe the earlier content, more recent content, costs something to get. Maybe that content's free. Maybe the people that own HBO own access to that content. Maybe, for the ownership. Like, there's all sorts of reasons we may never know, because it's the act of the question that really has the value. So it's not that you even know the answer, but you are getting in the habit of inquiring, of not just taking, but being an active participant in the media that you consume.
I think that this is so helpful to hear, because I think so often when we're talking about media literacy and media justice, we're thinking about how we deliver that to media consumers. But I also think it's really important to look at this from the perspective of media makers, and how do we effectuate around more quality produced media, and specifically, like, how do we get media makers to recognize that people are experts of their own experience, like you're saying.
That's a great line.
And I love that frame, and it's one that I want to put into the hands of people who do reporting, because ultimately media is meeting information needs. That's what the work of it is. But there seem to be so many fundamental disconnects of media makers misunderstanding and misrepresenting the populations that they're serving and reporting on.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing with, like television, with newspapers, and it's like a long thing to change, a long thing to teach. Well, you've seen in Philadelphia, there's been different publications that have really tried to do the work of like being in the communities, being embedded there, and really learning and being able to produce this like quality journalism. But it's not something that can happen overnight. And that's one of the reasons I love community-produced media, like PhillyCAM, like what we do at Media Mobilizing Project, because it's not like we're trying to get their story right, we're just giving them the mic. They're gonna get it right because it's theirs, and we'll help in whatever ways we can. But I do think it's worth it to challenge mainstream media. I do think there's people who are doing it. Right now, we're running a project with this organization called the Media Inequality and Change Center, Mike Center. And we're talking about the violence narrative in media. So as it stands right now, most media is not doing a great job. A lot of times it's like, oh, there was a shooting on this block, and that's the whole story. And we want more nuance and we want more context. So we're trying to have conversations with journalists in the area and really start digging into that, and like bringing community members into the conversation, bringing other organizers around criminal justice in the conversation. So when we share all these stories about violence, we're doing it in a way that has context, and we're talking about systematic reasons for it. We're talking about this and that, rather than, they just did it because they wanted to, But it's going to be a long project, we're just starting that, and it's been a thing that people have been trying to get right for a while now, and it's not something that happens overnight, but I do think there's a desire, and I see the desire among journalists as well. I've had journalists come to us, and they want to talk to us, and they want to know. So I think there's a desire on both sides, and I think we can eventually get there. Yeah.
I think that speaks also to the need of having media literacy be part of the education curriculum early on. So if we're raising people, young people who are asking these questions and who are gaining some of these production skills, basic creative expression skills, they're going to be better equipped to share their story. I think the media, let's say the traditional or the big news media, have gotten better, I think, at starting to recognize that people-generated, user-generated content has a role in what they do. So that gets brought in a little bit more. But I agree with you. It's a long process. It's going to take time for us to figure that out. And sort of where's the balance between the voices of individual people who are experiencing things and the voice of someone who helps you to synthesize that information and lend some perspective too. So figuring out that as well.
Yeah. I'm glad that we're getting to the point of local media too, because we're on local media, and I want to talk about what's the unique spot and need that you think, what are the unique spots and needs that you think local media helps to fill?
Yeah, so I think local media really fills in a lot of those gaps of what's going on in different neighborhoods and different communities. A lot of times the big news gets on television, but like the community meetings don't. And with our work specifically, we're talking about the organizing side of it and the social justice work. For example, I was thinking about the PES fire, the explosion in South Philadelphia. You both heard about it. I did not love all the media coverage of it, because I felt like a lot of it was really focused on the corporate side of it. So who's going to be the next owner? How is it going to affect the economy? Really digging into that, which is important, and we need to talk about it. But what I didn't see a lot of, I saw a limited amount of talking about the actual neighborhood around there. So there's all these community members that live right across the street. And they've been for years now talking about health issues that they've encountered from the pollution. And they've been at all the public meetings. They've been giving their comment. They've been out at PES oil refinery protesting. They've been stopping traffic, all these different things. And there was such limited coverage of that. And to me, it's those are the stories that we need to be sharing as well. And I think with what we do at Media Mobilizing Project, we really try to amplify that and share that story, since it wasn't being seen as much in mainstream media. And I think, we all have to do a better job of that as media creators.
I do think that there's a wonderful thing about localized television, localized media news coverage, and there's a not so good thing. The wonderful thing is that there are a lot of stories that would never have seen the light of day. They have a way to get that out and a way to share things with your neighbors and a local, important stories that need to be shared among communities. However, there's strength in numbers, and by sectioning that story off to one community and only showing it within that one community, you deprive the larger group of seeing how that community handled it. And what did they do? And oh, you had that problem, we had that problem too. And recognizing where maybe there was somebody higher that actually affected both of you, or maybe there was something I just could have learned a best practice from what you did and something that I could do. So there is a way of sort of, there is a potential for the communities to be marginalized in keeping them separate. So I do think that there's a role for both, and that's, it always comes back to money, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's really important to
back to money.
remember that media exists in a marketplace.
Yeah.
And that, to me, feels like a fundamental wrench.
Well, how about, we just watching this presidential election, and talk about the money, that, when you think about the money that gets spent on a presidential election, I think it's important. There's a line that has to get drawn that I think often people don't, which is, you look at someone, you hear a story where, so-and-so spent $20 million, $40 million on ads. Who made that money? Where did that money go? They didn't just write a check to no one. They wrote a check to a media company. That media company is not going to support campaign reform. Right. So when we have these discussions about the situation we're in and the money that gets spent, this is why we look to organizing groups like yours to help push that forward, because I don't know what the answer is to that per se. But I do think as a media literate person, that's a question you should be asking. Wow, that's a lot of money. Who made that? Where did that money go? Not just why did that XYZ person spend it, but actually who's benefiting from that money?
I really think the most powerful tool we have collectively in response to that is our spending, the spending of our attention. And so it is really helpful to have an organization like yours, which feels like this amazing template of kind of empowering communities to work in the direction of media with more kind of just assertion.
Yeah.
I want to talk about young people too. We've got a few minutes left. What do you think is, what are you feeling is like the future of media literacy? In working with young people, what sorts of issues or opportunities are you seeing come up?
In my dreams?
Yeah.
Okay, not like necessarily reality.
Yeah.
Or the reality I'm going to make happen. I feel that we need to get to a place where teachers, so teachers who are learning to be teachers, people who are learning to be teachers, are getting the media literacy training they need so that in every classroom there can be threaded into everything. Math class, science class, social studies class, language arts, there's some media literacy threaded through that so that at the youngest age we're helping young people to grow up with these skills and not just waiting until they're in college and take a course in college, if we're lucky, because even that's not happening everywhere, or never, or just something that you sort of stumble onto yourself. So in my dream, that would happen at a very young age and in an age-appropriate way. I feel like if you are young enough to pick up media, you are young enough to be media literate in an age-appropriate way. So if you're 1 year old and your guardian, parent, someone is handing you an iPad to watch stuff on, you are old enough for me to have a conversation with you about when we put it down. It starts at the earliest age.
What about around advocacy work?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Sherry said about just like ingraining this into our education. It's really important. I get impressed sometimes, though, when I talk to youth through my job with their understanding and their critical eye. I don't know if it's everyone or everywhere, but I have been impressed with their ability to know when a message is not true and to know when a message has a bias to it, and their ability to really critically analyze. So I'm hoping to see that path continue or expand. But I do think we need to, like make media literacy a part of our education. I think, like I said before, we really need to be challenging our platforms and really making sure that they're aiding us in that path. They need to be responsible as well. Yeah, I mean, I can see it happening, but I think it's going to take time, like everything.
Do you think that the combination of new platforms to be vocal, articulate media producers and this increased criticality that you're seeing among young people, do you see opportunities there to affect greater pressure on bigger media companies?
Well, I think a key part about activism, right, is helping someone understand that your voice has power, and you need to. Young people need that modeled for them, whether it's being modeled by the adults in your life or your teachers or a community media organization. It somehow needs to be modeled. I think it's a rare young person who just gets that they have that power. So then we have to help folks, and that can happen in classrooms and assignments where you say, we're going to all write a letter, or send an email to XYZ, or we're going to make a video that says that. So I think there's ways you can do that in a classroom. We try to empower parents a little more to have these conversations at home. Talk about do the couple of questions, whether it's 2 or 5 or whatever those key questions are. Have that conversation over the dinner table or wherever you are while you're brushing your teeth in the morning about something. And then the other piece, as far as being media literate and helping to empower people with these messages, is that we have to also recognize that people love media. They have fun with it, and young people love to be around it, and that we can't always be negative about less time, less this, don't spend so much. We also have to find ways to engage. We can have fun with it and be media literate. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, I think it's just getting back to your point, and this feels like a great point to end on, recognizing that media is a space to exercise the power that our voices have. So I think we're just about at the end of our time. There's a performance that's happening April 16th, 17th, and 18th at Fringe Arts that I'll be a part of. Is there anything that you all want to share?
Not just any performance, it's your
My
piece.
performance. Yes. Anything that you all want to share before we hop off?
If you are interested in getting involved in social justice work, learning about what's going on in the city, we have a website called Philly We Rise. If you go on it, you can subscribe to our newsletter. We also have social media where we share everything that's going on. And it's just about being a part of, an active part of our media and our active part of our democracy. Yeah.
I'll say that, I'm involved in lots of different projects, but if you want to hear the voices of young people talking about media, I have a podcast that's called Kids Talk Media. You can go to kidstalkmedia.net and listen to them.
Thank you so much.
Yo,